Hello everybody, this is your Peacekeeper coming at you with the final video in our How to Play series on the U.S. Navy battleships. This is the Tier 10 USS Montana class. The Montana class was designed to replace the Iowa class and fix some of the inherent problems with the Iowa class's armor scheme. If you'll remember, we talked in the Iowa class video about the Mark 8 Super Heavy shells proliferation through the 1940s, making the Iowa class's armor essentially obsolete. This class of battleship, the Montana class, was intended to fix those problems, so we have a lot more heavy armor all over the ship. We also see a return to the 12-gun configuration that we saw in the New Mexico and in the Nevada class, which isn't in the game, but is a frequent flyer in other World War II ship games. So that's a pleasant surprise. Of course, it is the 16-inch turrets, but we'll get to talking about that a little bit in the armament. The other thing that this class of ships was intended to do was to fit through a new set of locks at the Panama Canal. One of the biggest restrictions that the Iowa class had on its armor scheme and its width and length was due to the Panama Canal. During the construction of that ship, there were some changes made to make that accomplishable, and the Montana class was really intended not to be limited in width by those gates and locks at the Panama Canal. They were actually planning on building a new set of locks for the Panama Canal when this thing was being designed, so the new width restriction and length restriction was used. With that in mind, it did slow down a little bit, so the 30.5 knot top speed drops down to basically 28. But let's go ahead and let's get to talking about this ship. We'll go over the stats first. For a Tier 10 battleship, we have 96,300. The main battery is 4 turrets with 3 of the 16-inch 50 caliber Mark 7 guns, which are the same guns that were put in the Iowa class of battleships. The turrets themselves actually received a little bit of up-armoring over the Iowa class. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details about that other than just to say that this game doesn't accurately represent the armor scheme on this ship, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But secondary armament-wise, we do have the dual-purpose mounts are a 5-inch with 54 caliber now instead of 38 caliber dual-purpose guns. These guns in real life were actually taken and placed on the Midway class of carriers. They had gone through all the tooling and all the design for the 54 caliber 5-inch guns and decided that they didn't want to scrap them entirely, so they made their way onto the Midway in real life. But in this game, that's what they use for their secondaries. You would think that that would do something for these guns. It has the same exact 5-inch shells, same exact 5-inch anti-aircraft rounds. There is absolutely no advantage to having these over the 538s in the Iowa. You'll see 5-kilometer range, 1,800 damage. 6-kilometer because I have a fully upgraded captain, but 5-kilometer unupgraded, 1,800 damage. No advantage. So I don't know what the whole premise of it is. It don't make any sense to me. Moving along, you can see we have a lot of anti-aircraft guns. You'll see that just about all the Bofors mounts are the quad Bofors mounts. There's a lot of 20 mils as well, and of course our 5-inch 54 caliber dual-purpose mounts. It does have a maximum speed of 28 knots, like I spoke about earlier. It has a 950 meter turning circle and a rudder shift time of 14.9 seconds with the rudder shift upgrade. And of course it's a battleship, so it can be detected from a long range. In terms of upgrades, this we briefly spoke about it in the Iowas, what exactly I felt were the best upgrades, and that's going to change really depending on the climate of the game. As of the making of this video on November 30th, 2015, the presence of Tier 9 and Tier 10 aircraft carriers is basically non-existent. So I might try and mess around with some of the other options. But for the most part, right now, and should carriers ever return to high-tier gameplay, I still recommend going with the full anti-aircraft suite. The AA guns on this thing melt aircraft, and it's just fun to watch that. And because of the differences in the way the U.S. Navy's battleships are perceived in this game, the torpedo protection is really lacking compared to, say, the Yamato, which is the other Tier 10 battleship. With that in mind, you know, again, going back to what I've talked about for the previous videos, the U.S. battleship's primary torpedo defense is in not having the torpedoes launched at all. The only other modification that I might actually consider on this is going to be main battery modification 3 as opposed to AA gun mod 3. And what this is going to do is this is going to make the turrets take longer to turn, which can be a disadvantage, but if you've been playing a lot of the US standards, you had to turn the ship anyway. The ship turns okay, it's not super great, but you can at least point it a little bit easier. But it's going to drop your reload time that 12%. And that can add up, you know, over the course of a Tier 10 match, depending on what it is. It's not going to make up for the lack of armor penetrating capabilities at this tier, but you'll at least be able to kill cruisers off real fast. On that note, right now, this ship, in my opinion, is bugged or intentionally held down for whatever reason. I surmise it has something to do with the fact that the Yamato in this game is nearly untouchable by this ship, and the Iowa's a fact that isn't borne out in real life examples. But that's neither here nor there. For whatever reason, Wargaming has chosen to make this ship an understudy in terms of Tier 10 battleships. So with that in mind, you need to realize that this ship does not have the same hit-taking capabilities that the real one would have had the Montanas actually been built. And what I mean by that is if you actually look at the armor for the Montanas, the way it's laid out, and compare it to the Yamato, there's a lot of striking similarities between the two. The Yamato's had 17 some odd inches worth of belt armor. This has 16 inches of belt armor with an inch of STS backing plate for a total of about 17 inches. They're inclined about the same. Deck armor is actually thicker on this slightly. Really, at the end of the day, this whole ship shouldn't be taking damage as easily as it does to the ships it takes damage from. And that makes this ship incredibly frustrating to play. All of the Japanese battleship players are going to say, well, but you guys have a huge AA advantage. Right now, in 5.1, carriers don't exist in the upper tiers. I've literally gone almost a week of playing Tier 9 and Tier 10 matches without seeing a single Tier 9 or Tier 10 carrier. That's shocking. And that really negates any advantage that this ship would have had in this game otherwise. Because things that make US ships in this game powerful in real life aren't actually represented in this game correctly. So we don't have radar fire control systems with complex analog computers that can control the turrets and keep them on target while we're doing high-speed maneuvers at rough sea. We don't need that in this game because, well, for one, none of that stuff is actually in this game, and two, the player acts as the fire control system. Two, radar isn't in this game, period. So the advances that the US had in radar technology throughout the course of the war, non-existent. There's no advantage there. So really what this boils down to is all the US ships in this game have a lot of anti-aircraft capability, which means diddly if there is no carrier in the game for you to shoot down their aircraft. Right now, the Montana is underperforming for that very reason. We don't see Hikurus, we don't see Midways, we don't see Essexes, and we don't see the Tier 9 Japanese carrier, which I can't remember off the top of my head. All of that adds up to make this really underperform. Add into that the fact that you don't have the armor, and the Mark 8 super heavy shell isn't penetrating armor as well as it should be, or as reliably as it should be. And this ship, going up against other battleships, is at a disadvantage. Basically, it's a larger, slower, less maneuverable Iowa with an extra turret. So with that comes a little bit different play style. The play style that you're really going to have to play with this is as a support role. You're not going to be able to take hits nearly as well as you would if you were in the Yamato. On the flip side to that, your guns don't over-penetrate cruisers nearly as much. So while the Yamato is the superior Tier 10 battleship in a battleship-on-battleship fight, the Montana is really a much more overall well-rounded ship for the role of cruiser hunter. It's not as fast as the Iowa is, which is a disadvantage when chasing down a faster cruiser, but it has the capability for that first shot, knock 'em out hit. And that's really what this ship really excels at. The video that I'm going to show you for the combat, though, is going to illustrate some of my frustrations with the class more than how to play it. If you've been playing the U.S. battleships by now, the fast battleship line pretty much all plays the same. Don't show your broadside because this game doesn't accurately give you the armor that you would have anyway, so you're not able to take hits broadside as well as you should. In fact, this ship should be a lot like the Yamato in that regard, and actually better in some ways, that this game does not represent. So let's just boil it back down to don't show your broadside, unless you absolutely have to, and you'll see in this video I absolutely have to. And avoid close range with anything 16-inch guns or higher, because for whatever reason, the citadel on this thing through the nose is huge and through the tail is huge, big enough that even some ships that it wouldn't normally be able to do any damage to, or wouldn't be able to damage the Iowa, it will do damage to. So let's go ahead and get to that video, and we'll keep on chatting about my frustrations with this in that video. Okay, so in this match we're going to end up facing off against a Montana and a Yamato on the other team. There's also an Iowa and a Nazuma, but we got 3 Montanas. Normally I'd be super thrilled about this because really 3 Montana should be able to take on a Yamato and a Montana and an Iowa. Something happens and there's some communication issues and we end up not all going the same way. But as you can see, this is trap. I'm going to head to A, and we're going to kind of duke it out on the northeastern side of the cap point.
Action stations.
This video, there's not a lot of damage, although 96,000 damage in how short I actually last in this game. I didn't think it was too bad. If that would have continued on and would have had a team that was actually playing well, wouldn't have been too big of an issue, and we probably would have won, but there just wasn't any communication going on between myself and anyone else, and at the end of the day, if you don't communicate, you don't win. But as you can see, there's no aircraft carriers either, so all that AA advantage that I have means diddly. It is a pretty ship. I mean, I really do enjoy the visuals of the later tier U.S. battleships. I really enjoy the visuals on all of the U.S. battleships, but this, it reminds me of like a big grown-up Iowa, and that's, I don't know, it gives me the heebie-jeebies and makes me, I really enjoy it anyway, I guess I should say. Still no camo. Refuse to run camo. It's already expensive. It's just bristling with guns. Too bad those guns don't actually translate to more damage. I mean, I guess they do if you run into a bunch of people that aren't really paying attention, but if you're playing against anybody worth their salt, it's not exactly something that happens readily. You really spend a lot of time punishing people for showing their broadsides with this, and that's really what you had to do with the Iowas too. And in this ship anyway, you don't have the maneuverability or speed to really engage and then disengage, engage and then disengage like the North Carolinas did, which have the same speed but turn tighter. So at the end of the day, you really do try and play support ship. You can see that one of our Montanas is either not loaded in or is AFK. The other is heading in the other direction. How nice of them. Also in this video, you're going to see my primary frustration with this ship, and that is the citadel at any angle that for whatever reason, the Iowas don't suffer from, but the Montanas do. You know, Karn flabbited, we can't have any real durability in a U.S. battleship. This is not correct. I was hoping that Otago would come around the corner, but he don't. Got Namagi instead, so... Oh! Look! There's our Yamato. He's out of my range, but we can at least take some pot shots at the Magi and see what happens. There's another thing I don't like about this ship and about the later tier US battleships is the shell spread. I mean, that was lined up pretty well. The only difference is that I undershot him because he was turning. In doing so, I only hit him once and no damage. How that works out, I don't know. The Mark 8 super heavy shell, AP shell, has a lot of armor penetrating capability, so it must have hit something at a glance. Probably hit the superstructure, but to do no damage is a little frustrating. Fog Cruiser Yubari and I are getting pretty close. He's my bestie! And of course, shooting at other tier 10 battleships in this, especially at long range, yeah, 5 hits and 1,300 damage. What? Okay. If you say so. I mean, that to me seems a bit unrealistic. I haven't really messed around with the armor penetrating capabilities of the round, but I can't imagine that I wouldn't have penetrated something in the course of doing that. And our battle continues. Then I realize that I'm lined up on the Yamato, not the Montana. I have noticed that if you angle your ship slightly before shooting, it does seem that they do group a little bit better. It still doesn't really help out too much. 4 hits for 7,000 damage. But it doesn't take a genius to realize that this is really a bad place to be. I'm really just taking advantage of the fact that the Yamato and the Montana both have their broadsides exposed to me. But there's no one else around. I've got an Amagi, and he is quickly bailing. And I've got a destroyer off ahead of me. And he is, well, he's being stealthy. He's not really doing anything except for launching torpedoes. So I got a choice. I can either get up here and just fight nose to nose and pray that I can dodge, duck, and weave, or I'm going to have to get out of this situation. So I opt for the latter. I'm going to start kind of ducking up by where this Amagi is, and then I realize he starts turning back out. What's he doing? I don't know. There's a Yamato doing 7,000 damage with 2 shell hits. Pleasant. Magi's coming back around. 1,200 damage, so he hit my superstructure and over 10. And there's 2 shell hits for 5,000 damage on me from a Yamato. Zumo's still backing up. Woo, I shot something down with my awesome AA, scout plane. Well, I'm gonna have to turn broadside here, and this is when the butt hurt starts happening. Yep. There's 10k gone. Somehow missed an Amagi at close range. And run into another one. I don't know what fired those. I think that was the Montana back there. I'm actually pretty fortunate that both the ooh, there's a Citadel. That both the Montana and Yamato decided that they were going to duck out of this fight. Or at least that that island was in the way of them getting into this fight. The Yamagi's no longer an immediate threat, so I'm going to switch over to this Iowa and see if I can't help them figure out what's going on and maybe sink him. He ends up beaching himself. It's alright, we'll incapacitate a turret then. Maybe a second turret then. Nope, we'll just take it out entirely. No turret for you, Iowa. No citadels, which is really kind of frustrating. You'll see me kind of going up and then bringing it back down. That's just, I'm trying to get the game to avoid shooting at the little atoll that's right there. Oh, we got Namagi coming around the end of this. So I'm going to need to make up my mind which direction I'm going to turn. In hindsight, turning away probably would have resulted in a longer life. It didn't. I kept slowing up, speeding down. I was kind of hemming and hawing about which direction I wanted to go. Probably not the wisest thing, but you know. There's me taking 9,000 damage from 2 shell hits on from an Iowa. Yamato shooting at me. Okay, 11k. 3 hits. Yeah, not bad, not bad. Derped a turret. Will derp a turret. Amagi's broadside will take advantage of that. Add a citadel. There's my turret incapacitation.
Main turret critically damaged.
Now what happens from here is nothing short of annoying and a huge frustration that I have. Boom! Double citadel from a Yamato. Nose on. And he is 12.5 kilometers out.
Problem solved, sir.
I'm sorry, but that is not how this game should work. If I was in an Iowa, that would not have happened. And I know that wouldn't have happened because I've been in the same situation dozens upon dozens upon dozens of times, and I've never received a citadel through the nose in an Iowa. In a Montana, it happens all the time. Whether it's the nose or the tail, it doesn't matter. And that is really what frustrates me about this ship. The Yamato is basically invulnerable unless it is showing its broadside to you, or you can get the lucky citadel hitting the bridge area of the Yamato. The Yamato basically has to look at you and can penetrate you at any angle, regardless of what range you are. That is not balanced gameplay, and giving me a huge comprehensive AA sweep isn't an advantage. And we, as U.S. Navy battleship players, really need to stop using that as our excuse as to why our gameplay is tolerable the way it is. Frankly, I think it's a joke. I've seen Yamatos with AA spec down hordes of aircraft from a midway, and I can't even do the same thing. Add in all the other advantages that the Yamato has over it with the bigger heel, tighter turning radius, better secondaries overall. There's absolutely no reason to play the Montana in this game. The Iowa is cheaper. In fact, in that game, losing the ship and the ammunition that I spent was 300,000. I got 161,000 and I did 100,000 damage, or 96,000 damage. That's unacceptable when I can do 96,000 damage in an Iowa and profit, even in that loss, and still not take damage in the same way, and still have a really good AA suite. So with that, I'm extremely frustrated with the way the Montana currently plays out. To add insult to injury, if you look at the in-game files, the Montana's armor isn't even close to being accurately portrayed in this game. Why? I don't know. I suspect it's because they don't want the fanboys, the Yamato fanboys, to feel like their ship is at a disadvantage over a U.S. ship because, you know, the Yamato is the queen of the sea. She can sink whatever she wants. All she has to do is look at it funny. That's not fair to other Tier 10 battleship players, and it's part of the reason why I have gone to the destroyer line, because at least the U.S. destroyer line is tolerable, and that's really sad because the U.S. destroyer line was in a really bad place for the longest time. But At any rate, that concludes the battleship video. My next planned videos will probably be the U.S. destroyer line. I really enjoy their gameplay, so stay tuned for those videos. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching.